Hi, everyone. Welcome to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm Christine Courtney, and I am excited today because we have somebody coming to us from Charlotte, North Carolina, a new guest here on the podcast, the lovely Betsy Kauffman. And let me tell you a little bit about Betsy. Betsy Kauffman is the founder and CEO of Cross Impact Coaching. She's a TED speaker and an executive leadership coach who helps mid-market CEOs and senior leadership teams align their leadership to navigate the complex challenges like AI adoption, rapid growth, and acquisitions. After 25 years leading large-scale technology transformations across Fortune 500 companies, she now focuses on helping leadership teams close that gap between strategy and execution, something we could all use a little more of. And her TED Talk, I highly recommend it. I watched it. Her TED Talk, 4 Tips for Honest Conversations at Work, has over 1.6 million views. That's incredible. So welcome, Betsy.
Hi, Christine. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about it because I think it's so fascinating that you were in technology for so long and then made this transformation. So let's start back in your days in technology for a minute.
Dinosaur age, yeah.
Yeah, well, think about it. I mean, now it's on the tip of everybody's tongues.
Right.
When you look back at watching all these technology transformations, and I think it's great to look back because, well, for instance, my mom was one of the first people to sell personal computers, right?
How
So
fun.
when I
Yeah.
talk to her about what's happening now with AI, she's like, Christine, this is what they said about PCs.
All
Like,
the time.
I thought
Right,
PCs were going to take over
right,
for people's
right.
life,
Yeah.
and we're still working. So I was like, yeah, okay, that's true. So in your years of looking at it, was there a moment kind of early in your career when you were convinced maybe that technology was the problem or some technology where you were using, or I don't know, what was that like in that world? Give us a picture of that for a little
Yeah,
bit.
I mean, I think to your point, Christine, we've gone through these types of technical transformations for multiple times. So maybe before me, I was just getting into technology. We had the dot-com boom, right? And then I got into the agile ways of working and agile technology and agile software development. I've got an app for that. We're building apps on all, with iPhones and things like that. And so in the very beginning, you always enter a project thinking it is a technology. We've got to get the technology figured out. We have bad data, or we're on old systems, or we're on mainframes. Then we come to find out, usually, yes, there might be some sort of a technology problem, but it's truly like the people that are leading that effort are the ones that need to align first and figure out how to solve the bigger problems before the technology is going to do its fix. And we're literally seeing the same thing with AI. We have all these companies that want to implement all these AI agents, and they're very excited about, the transformation and what it could be. But if we don't know what we're trying to solve for and what the problem is, and we keep layering like new technology on top of old, bad systemic problems, we're just going to have a bigger mess. And AI, I think, is going to bring that to the forefront even faster than maybe some of the past technological advances that we've been looking at and implementing. So it's usually the technology problem that we're trying to solve for. And unfortunately, it's probably the wrong approach. It's probably about what's the business outcome that we need to solve for first. And then as a company and as a leadership team, how do we get aligned around what it is that we're trying to do?
That's interesting. So is that, I mean, I suppose I'm making an assumption, but I suppose that's one of the reasons why now your work focuses so much on aligning teams, right?
Yes. It's funny because a lot of times we would come in to help with the project or with the teams or with the high performance. They would tap me on the shoulders and say, come sit with us. We, as a leadership team, we're struggling. So I was usually mandated to come fix a certain problem within the organization, within a project or a program or a transformation. And leadership would say, no, we actually need you sitting over here. We need the help. We need to learn how to talk better together. We need to learn how to have good conversations and make sure that we're aligned before our teams go execute on that. And so it's funny because the work that I do morphed into that. I didn't actually set out to be a leadership coach and a leadership team alignment specialist. I started, I left my very secure job at Bank of America to go do agile development and training and help build high performing product development teams. And then as we got more and more into it, they were like, no, the leadership needs you more than we do, which is usually the case, right? And so we kind of have evolved into that type of a company and that type of a consultancy.
Interesting. So when you started, you were doing work training the entire team, and the teams were shouting like, no, help our leadership?
Yes. Yeah, we'd come in and run. Yeah, we'd run trainings and they'd say, "Yeah, we get it. We know what we know what we need to do. Thank you so much. This has been great. But actually, you really need to go help our leadership team to get figured this out because we need for them to all be on the same page because they were getting different directions." I worked in a lot of different, like across multiple areas, so product, business, technology. And so we would try to help those teams learn how to work better together to become more high performing. And they were getting each area was getting a different direction from their leader. And they were saying, please go help our leaders. Please go help our leaders. Like we can play nicely together. We're okay playing nicely together. It's our leaders that need help. And so then I would, okay, fine. And so I would, the leader that usually brought me in, I would actually go tell them, by the way,
You would?
yeah. Oh, yeah. That's I think that's probably why I've been successful so far is that I would say, hey, by the way, they actually think I need to spend time with you guys because our challenges are not at the team level, they're at the leadership level. And I see that all the time.
So what
I'm
would they say?
constantly, okay, how do you
That's
suggest
good.
we go about this, right? And so usually it's like, let's get into a room. Let's talk about some of the big things that I'm hearing. And I'd bring them up. They were the elephants in the room. And people knew they existed, but it was being able to have a safe place to like kind of create that container to say, okay, we're not working well together. When you say one terminology, somebody means something different. How do we actually get to the point of true like alignment and that we're all showing up as the same direction and where we want to go? What didn't happen overnight, right? So it wasn't like, let's all get in a room and we're going to come out singing Kumbaya. I mean, there's a lot of long knocked out, drag out like conversations and I get very emotional, because people sometimes feel like, well, you're calling my baby ugly. Well, what about your baby? Like, and so, you're really trying to get folks to come together and figure out how do we work better together and how do we actually create the environment that makes our team successful and our company successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. In building your corporate practice, after years, building your coaching practice after years in kind of corporate life, that's a big leap, I imagine. Was there kind of any mistake you learned from? I love sharing mistake stories on here
Yeah.
because I feel like so often we're just sharing our all these successes and the
Successes.
people listening are oftentimes dealing with their own challenges and I think it's good to learn from mistakes that others have made too. So
Yeah.
was there any mistake that you made in that process that you're like, oh, when I look back, it was good to learn from, but this
Yeah.
is one of those moments.
Several. Okay, so which one do we start with? I'm trying to think. I'm like, there's so many. I have two. I'll do one. When you're getting started, especially with me, I had a 15, 20-year career before I left and started my practice. At that point, you're kind of a Swiss Army knife. You can do a lot of different things. And so I was trying to be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So people were like, oh, you can come help us with training, or you can help us with leadership coaching, or you can come help us with product transformation. And, when you can do that, it actually almost dilutes who you are because then you're like, one, you can't spread too thin. And you can also, people don't know like, okay, wait, when do I call you? Do I call you for leadership coaching? Do I call you for product transformation? Do I call you for training? And so really trying to figure out like what it is that you want to do and what's your niche and just diving into that, I think is one word of advice that I would give. And so, I got to a point where I literally had about 5 or 6 clients and one call would be about training and one call would be about this and one call would be about that. Just start to really the context switching and trying to be all things to all people isn't helpful. You can burn yourself out. And I did. And I'm still kind of struggling with that today because the Swiss Army knife skills have not stopped, but I have to be a little bit more selective about the kind of work and how much work I can take on at any given time and really kind of find some pace and balance between that.
Yeah, it's true. I think we're so afraid, like,
To
is
say
there
no.
other work coming? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. How did you recognize those? I mean, I think I find so many people, we don't see the hints of that burnout's coming
Yeah.
fast enough. Can
Yeah.
you think back to what some of those early warning signs were for you?
Yeah, I think it was, well, one, it was when I'm a kind of a color coder on my calendar, right? And so like this client gets this color and this client gets this color. And I would look at my calendar and be like absolutely overwhelmed and see like I had like 10 different colors across my calendar, not including all my personal stuff. I have a family and I'm trying to, to keep them on track and have them move forward in their lives. So I think just like when you'd wake up and be like, oh my gosh, I have to be prepared for 7 different meetings, and like the overwhelm was there. Also, it takes a lot of time to prepare and to prepare for every single client to make sure that you, as you show up, that you're showing up, 100% focus on them. So I think, just being like, wow, it's the overwhelm piece of it. And then what I would get on a client call and be like, I just really don't want to work with this client. And you kind of get that pit
Wow.
in your stomach and you're like, why am I doing this work? How do I stop doing the work? Can I, is there a way to say no? And in consulting and in coaching, and I was just looking at my feed, and one of my groups, there are several women that are in a corporate and they're like, I think I want to make the jump. I think I want to make the leap to, coaching or consulting and all of that. I mean, it's a really hard jump to make. And to your point that you said earlier, it can be feast or famine. Like it can be somewhat of a roller coaster of like, I have 10 or 15 different clients coming at me, and then the statements of work end, and am I going to get something new, and can I say no to stuff? And so it's trying to make the best judgment calls at the moment, right? When you're in it and trying to figure out what's happening.
For you, I'm curious, what is the client that you don't like to work with? Like, don't tell me the names, but obviously, like, what are the
Yeah.
qualities that you're
Yeah.
like, this is not that you, I assume, try to say no to now, but
Yeah.
sometimes we don't know till we're in it. But how do you know? What are those qualities?
So it's kind of funny, and I guess it's why I do what I do now with my practice. But when the leaders are not bought in to what we're trying to do, and they're not showing up and they're not engaging in the engagement and saying, okay, yes, we all want to be here and we want to be a part of it, that's what I don't want to be a part of. So I know that's kind of a generic, but it really is true. If we're not getting the support from the leaders, we're going to do a lot of really good work at a certain point, but then it's going to hit a wall because we don't have the support of the people that we need to keep us moving forward. And the teams feel that, and the folks that are actually doing the hard work to make change and make transformational change are going to feel that as well. So I like to, that's why I usually try to start at the top. Be like, okay, you want me to come in, but I want your support. And I'm going to give you feedback, and there's things that we're going to have to do that we're going to have to change. And can you get behind that? And if they can't, that's kind of like a big sign to be like, okay, well then you're going to spend a lot of money, not a lot, okay, a little bit of money. it's all relative, right? You're going to spend a little bit of money, a good chunk of money, and you're not going to see the results that you want because you're not putting your support and your time behind it. So when they don't have time for the type of work that we're doing is when I'm like, time out. Do we need to pause this and come back to it in a few months when you're ready to really dig in? I'm working with a client right now. We just wrapped it up actually yesterday that the engagement ended, and they weren't as engaged. And we got some success, and it was good. We could have gotten a lot more if they had been a lot more engaged. And so, one of them said, send another statement of work, ready to do more work. And I'm like, I don't think you are. Let's take a pause, back in about 6 or 8 weeks when you're ready to, to focus on it and see what happens. And that's a tough decision to say, no, we're going to put a pause on this, right? Especially as a independent coach and consultant. Is probably not the most normal thing that most people do.
Yeah, but I mean, that's one of the things I think that comes, the privileges that comes for us later in life is that we have the ability to maybe see it more clearly
Yeah.
and say that, right? Have a
Yeah.
little more confidence in that. I think it's interesting that you say that because those of you who are leaders out there, no matter what, if you're a middle manager, if you lead one other person, if your team is doing something, it makes such a difference if that leader is in there and fully engaged, not on their phone, not doing something else.
Yeah.
We run the company that I worked for years. We worked in schools, right? And I would go into
Okay.
classrooms and work with the teacher. And I'll tell you, it was night and day. If the teacher was involved in
Yes.
it and the kids got to see the teachers participating and doing something, the amount of engagement and impact shot up. Like the performance was so we
Yeah.
started preparing teachers for like, if you want to do this, this is what it has to be. And
Right.
now you're so right, Betsy. I see the same thing in businesses. The other day I went into a workshop here in New York, and the leader was 100% in, so open, so vulnerable, sharing real stories, and everybody was then sharing. Like I
Engaged.
was like,
Yeah.
oh, what a difference.
And
What
I
a
bet they don't have
difference.
as much turnover either. I bet the team members love to work for that kind of leader, right? Because they're engaged, they're excited, they want to be a part of it. They're coming to the table with the vulnerability or with the transparency or whatever is needed at that time. Again, I still say that people don't leave companies, they leave leaders. And so if you're not engaged and focused and supporting your people, even your one person, that you're going to potentially lose them because they need the feedback and they need the help.
And and I think it's just because the leaders are, quote unquote, busy that they think, oh, I'm doing the right thing by my team by having Betsy or Christine or whoever come in here. And
Right.
so check, check, check,
Yep.
but they're not realizing that it's so minimized, and sometimes it's actually detrimental based on whatever their engagement is,
Yeah,
So
100%.
so critical. And somehow everybody knows this until they become a leader and then they forget it. So
Yeah. Well,
we're
what
here to
happened?
remind
Why
you.
did it not go well? Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's why we see a lot of transformations fail. So AI transformation, it doesn't matter. If you're doing any type of transformation, you're trying to really change the company. If the leaders aren't involved and they aren't driving the change and the support of it, it's not going to go well. I can tell you that because you're going to get to a certain point and it's going to stop because people are like, well, what are we working on? And is this important enough? And my leader's not engaged. So why should I do this as well? And that's where that's truly, forget the technology layer on top of it. It's all about human and change management and leaning into your people.
I love that. That's such a good reminder. Let's shift a little bit to, people who listen. One of the things that we hear over and over again is that they love that they come away with this, 30 minutes that were in their ear with some actionable tips and takeaways. And that's one of the things I admire about your work is that you're really good about giving those kinds of tips for folks. First of all, you talk about a leadership operating system, right?
Yeah.
Shared behaviors, vision frameworks, execution rhythms. So for a senior leader who has never thought about this formally, let's say, what's the one thing they could put in place this week to start building that? Well, first of all, maybe explain it a little bit
Yeah.
to us, and then something that people can do to use some of this kind of operating system that you talk about.
Yeah. So what we typically do with the leadership operating system is when we learn the leadership team and we try to figure out like how do they work together, what's their current style, and then we put in place some potential frameworks that might help them to work better together. So if we find that they're struggling with decision making or delegation or how do we actually work together better as a team, we'll start to bring those out together and create patterns and frameworks and verbiage to help them to learn to work better as a team. And so with that, we also try to talk about, okay, what are the most important things that we should be talking about? What are our highest priority initiatives, our projects? And so I think the number one thing that a leader could possibly put in place is I would actually bring your team together for 1 hour and ask them, like, if we had to make one decision today that would have the biggest impact, what would that be?
I love
And
that.
get them to speak for 1 hour and decide on one decision that is needed to impact the company or the department, depending on where you sit in the organization, and really get them to figure out, okay, let's do this one decision. Let's get behind it. And so it is about getting focused. It is about bringing out the tough things. It is about getting folks to understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish. I mean, that leadership operating system is now when we can have the language and we can have the tough conversations and we can put in frameworks that are necessary, we can then make sure that we're all focused on the most important things and not all the other things that distract us. And as you all know, when we get into companies, like there's a million things that are coming at us and it's really hard to focus. And so trying to get the folks all on the same page is just for 1 hour would be critical.
I love that. In one decision, 1 hour.
One decision to make
I
the biggest
love it.
impact.
I love it. All right. So in your TED Talk, you talk about honest conversations at work. And
Yes.
I completely agree with you that almost every conflict, when you dig into it after a long enough time, you find out that the answer is someone needs to communicate, right? It's
Yeah.
usually you can only control yourself. So you need to have some sort of what we call difficult or honest conversation. And so you talk about 4 kind of tips to kickstart honest conversations at work. That's what the TED talks about. Give us a couple of those because I
Okay.
do think they're
Yeah.
so valuable.
Yeah. Let me give you the 4 tips. And it's interesting because I think, one of the things that you've asked me and others have asked me is, well, what's the most important of the 4 tips? And I'm like, I might actually turn that back on you, Christine. So let me tell you the 4 tips, and then I'd love to hear what you think it is because I'm like, I don't know if I could pick just one. But the first tip is confidence and courage, right? So a lot of times we have something to say and we don't have the confidence or the courage to actually say it out loud for whatever reason, depending on where you are in the organization, or you don't have the political capital, or you don't think you do. So first, finding that confidence and that courage is the first tip. The second one is to really understand what is the intent behind you speaking up. So like you're speaking up for a reason, but why? Not just to talk, hopefully, but because you have something to say, you want to move it forward. This problem needs to be put out there. It's not about the person, it's about the problem, that type of thing. So it's about leading with intent, right? The third tip is having factual data and good information. So it's one thing to sit and just kind of like blubber all the things that are going wrong and, this is bad and this is bad. Well, let's actually have some data behind it. So Why is it something that we need to talk about? What's happened? What's the history? If there's actually true data. People like specific examples in order to have that conversation. And then the fourth is actually bringing a solution. So it's easy to, like, I call it to dump up or to dump in somebody's lap. Like, these are all the problems, we need to go fix them, but also coming with a solution. And I think that's might be maybe the one thing I'm like that people don't do is that they want to talk about all the problems, but they don't ever want to try to fix them because maybe a misery loves company type of thing. It's funny because I was working with the CIO and she and I were talking. I was in that mindset of all the things that were wrong. And I was just like, all these things are wrong. She's like, well, great. What should we do about them? Bring me a solution. And it paused me, right? That's my humans. I was like, yeah, you're right. I should probably come and help with this as opposed to just trying to dump all these problems in your lap. And so I think that, if I had to pick one, it'd probably be the fourth one, is come with a solution or potential solutions to at least turn the conversation and kind of open it up. So I guess for Christine, for your perspective, what do you think of the four, if you remember them, is the most important one?
Well, I do agree that it is hard to choose one because you really need all four. I think probably the one that whichever one someone struggles with the most is the one that is the most important, right?
True.
Because
Yeah.
there's usually one that we forget. I think, I find the second one interesting because I think that the intent is something that a lot of people don't ask themselves.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I find that if you take that moment right before you walk in, I mean, hopefully you do it before the moment, but at
Right.
least I try to, because we're busy and running. I find that if I take a moment to just take a deep breath in to ground myself and then say, okay, what's the intention? What's my positive intent out of this
Right.
conversation? I come in with a much more grounded, confident
Right.
way of being that tends to not inflame what can already be difficult for that person to hear, right? So I find that when I don't do that, I can come in with an energy that can make the conversation go in a much more difficult way. So to me, I find that to be the most helpful. Usually I don't have the guts to have an honest conversation if I don't have my backup ready.
Right. Yeah.
So I know I'm going to be ready
I'm
with
just
that
gonna go at it.
specific
Yeah.
because if I go in, I grew up temping. My first temp job ever was, I worked in HR at Cushman and Wakefield. And so
Okay.
I learned so many tricks of the trade then, but I know the first thing I was taught was, you cannot say, oh, it's your attitude or you're unprofessional or it
Right.
has to be based in behavior. So that was kind
Right.
of ingrained into me. But I think those are really a great little four, like almost like a checklist
Yeah.
for yourself before you go in, really helpful. And the people that get good at it, and I always say it doesn't necessarily become easier. It just becomes
not
that
easier. Yeah.
it's always
Yeah.
hard. But I
Yeah.
think the more you do it, the more you're like, okay, here we go. And you have them earlier
Yeah.
instead of waiting.
Yeah. And I think, also if you need to find a peer that you trust, right? And say, hey, I really need to have a conversation. I need to have this conversation with somebody else. Can I practice? And if you don't have a peer, honestly, just saying it out loud if you're driving in the car or you're wherever, getting ready in the morning, because sometimes we need to hear our voice and how we think we're going to articulate it. If you have that luxury, right? If you have the luxury to say, okay, today I'm going to go in and I'm going to have a hard, honest conversation. If you need to articulate it out loud, because when you can hear yourself saying it, you're like, okay, let me get this just right. How do I frame this? Because honestly, maybe the fifth tip is delivery is everything. And sometimes that's what we maybe get wrong the most is how did it come out the way I wanted it to? It doesn't always have to be perfect. And you can almost say I'm going to be a little imperfect in how I say this, but I've got to say it right. But delivery is everything. And that's another thing that we coach on is how do we deliver, our feedback and our thoughts with impact and intent. And so I think, the more you practice, the better you're going to get at it as anything. For sure.
Yeah. And AI is a wonderful way to practice. I mean, you tried putting your, having it record yourself and give you feedback.
Yes.
Even if you're embarrassed to practice with a person, I mean, a person is perfect because they're going to give you facial expressions and everything that you'll start to read that code. But even if you can't do it, get in there with your.
That's a great tip. Maybe that's tip number 6, or maybe it's tip number 1. First,
We're
get your
just
favorite
full of it.
AI agent and go talk to it and have it give you feedback on how you just delivered that message. Right? It's funny because I've just been starting to use that talk to AI, and it's Okay, that's pretty cool, right? So we're starting to learn all these different new tools out there, which is awesome. I love the technology and where it's going.
And you have to tell it to be hard on you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it will just, blow smoke,
Oh,
which
that
is
was
also kind of
fantastic,
funny.
Christine. You're
You're so
amazing.
clever.
Just like all the things that you've talked about in the past, you're the most clever person I've ever met. And just you go for it. You've got it.
That sounds good, actually, especially on a Friday afternoon.
Right?
All right.
Exactly.
All right. So, this is something I'm always interested in, Betsy. When you look back at who you were growing up, right? Was there something you did, like a role you had naturally, or why are you who you are now? In other words, what were some things you did that you could still see were in you, in
Yeah.
fourth grade, in fifth grade,
It's
in sixth
funny.
grade?
Something hit me maybe couple years ago because I was like, again, as I was trying to find my niche and what I want to do and who I want to work with, I'm like, I really like the dynamic of teams. I just love teams. I really do. I love watching a group of people come together and create something. And growing up, I played a ton of sports. I was a competitive swimmer. I was in gymnastics. I did field hockey. I did soccer. I was in a million different sports. And as I started to get older, I started to kind of opt out of the individual sports and found myself gravitating more and more to like soccer and field hockey. And my son plays lacrosse. And I really loved just watching the dynamic of a team as opposed to just being an individual. Yes, you're on a swim team, right? Or you're on a gymnastics team, but it truly is about your individual performance and how you're going to do, as opposed to as a team, how do we pull upon each other's strengths? And so I guess I'd never realized it, but as I started to think about like, wow, I just love teams and I love team dynamics. And I think it goes back to when I was on winning teams and losing teams, and I knew the role that I had to play, and then I knew the role that other people had to play. I knew my strengths, they knew their strengths, and like it's just fun to watch it all come together and really like appreciate what each person brings to the table. So it was one of these like I never really thought about why I love teamwork so much. And I think it's just because that's how, when I was thinking about growing up, I love being a part of team. I love doing group projects. I'm that person. I know people hate. I know kids are like moaning, "Oh God, another group." I love them. I love them
Yeah.
because, one, it's not always on you and you do get to lean on other folks. And there's a lot of just different like opinions and mindsets. And so I just think that that's what's kind of brought me to where I am today and why I've really decided to get into the how do we get leadership teams to come together and how do we get them thinking and working together better.
And those kids, why they don't like those group projects is because they are constantly having to be forced into situations
Yes.
to have difficult conversations and honest conversations that they do not
Right.
want to have. And a lot of times they don't have the skills for it, but teachers are hoping that by putting them in those dynamics, they're learning way more than it's not about what they're learning in the
Right.
Civil War or the American Revolution or whatever it is they're in teams
Yeah.
to work out. They're really looking at how do we work better
Better
together
together.
because the feedback from the corporate world years ago was we are not educating our kids to be able
Right.
to work in teams.
To work
And
together.
so
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
changed it, but boy, is it boy when there are kids just like you say, little Betsies that love it, and there are other ones that are like, oh God,
Yeah.
like my
Yeah.
son, oh my God, he
Right.
he would dread it. He's much more introverted, much rather do that, but
Yeah.
yet he's a great soccer team player. So
Right.
it's just a matter of like where is your comfortability too. But I love that. I love
Yeah.
imagining the sports and you being able to see that relationship, right? To
Right.
real
Right.
teamwork. That's great.
Yeah. It's fun.
Well, I love what you're doing. I think it's
Thank you.
great. Is there ways that people can get in touch with you if they're
Sure.
interested, or
Yeah.
we'll put it in the show notes as well?
Absolutely. So you can link in with me, obviously, Betsy Kauffman. Our website is crossimpact.co. And we have a free leadership alignment survey. So if you just go to crossimpact.co, it's going to pop up. It's 10 quick questions that'll give you a lot of insights into like, how do we work as a leadership team? How do I show up as a leader? How do I think my peers show up as a leader? And then the last thing is I have a book coming out probably very soon. And so it's called The Fix, and it's a business fable about people are not broken, but your system is. So stay tuned for that. If you actually find me on LinkedIn, you'll see all the different posts about it. And then you can buy it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Spotify or all the fun formats. There's multiple ways to find me. LinkedIn may be the best. Just link in and reach out to me. So, yeah.
Love it. Well, thank you. And thanks, Betsy, for joining us on this episode. And thanks everybody for out there for listening. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Christine.
Bye-bye. Thanks for spending time here on Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you want to get anything more out of this, go to our YouTube channel and please subscribe to Leadership Lab TV. If you heard something today, of course, that resonated with you, do something with it. It's all about the choices that you make. It's what you say in conversations, how you show up in a moment. Share this episode with someone who's maybe starting a new job or stepping into a new level of leadership, and try one idea because it just might create some pretty powerful leadership ripple effects. Until next time, keep stepping in because the room changes when you do.